Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for today's webinar on top reports to the Colorado Attorney General's Office in 2022. My name is Mark Butterhoff. I'm the Program Manager for AARP ElderWatch, and I'm joined by Jan Zvislin from the Colorado Attorney General's Office.
Hello, everybody.
And we're very happy to be here today to talk about the top scams that were reported, or top complaints to the Colorado Attorney General's Office that took place in 2022. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. If you do have a question, we ask that you put it into the chat box, and we will get to it as soon as we're able to. In addition to that, everyone has been muted, and my colleague Jeremiah, I think, assured me that everyone's muted, so you shouldn't have to worry about that. But again, if you do have a question, please put it in the chat box, and we'll hope to get to everything today. Again, thanks for joining us today. I understand that there are other things going on in the world, such as basketball starting up, but this I assure you is going to be way more entertaining than any of the college basketball that's starting up today. In addition to that, I know that a lot of people register for these events and maybe are not able to attend or watch that very moment, but this is being recorded. So if you do have friends or family members who would like to watch it, there will be recordings sent out to all of the registrants, and you will be able to share that with friends and family as well. And we'll also host it on our YouTube page so you can watch it kind of at your leisure. But again, thanks for joining us today, and I'm excited to talk about the top kind of complaints and reports that were sent in to the Colorado Attorney General's Office in 2022. So just for those of you who are not aware, AARP ElderWatch is a partnership between AARP and the Colorado Attorney General's Office that has been around for over 20 years. During the pandemic, we celebrated our 20th year of working together with the Attorney General's Office, and but we're hoping to actually celebrate it sometime this year as we can now get together. You know, it's a program that really works on education outreach to older adults all across Colorado, and we also have a volunteer staff call center that helps people out with different types of fraudulent experiences they're dealing with, just if they want to talk with someone about an experience involving identity theft or a company that they're dealing with that they believe is doing something shady, or maybe a scam call they've been dealing with as well. We deal with all types of different complaints like that, and are happy to help out. The phone number will be at the end, but it is part of the Colorado consumer line that's run by the Attorney General's Office, and the number is very easy to remember. It's 1-800-222-4444, and as part of that listing, we are number 2. So, but it walks you through very nicely. If you ever want to call us and chat with us, you can get a hold of us. You can also get a hold of the Attorney General's Office when you call that number. So ElderWatch has been around again for over 20 years. I've been with the program about a third of the time that it's been around. Jan has actually been with the program since its inception, and he's helped start the program back over 20 years ago. And so we're thrilled to have Jan with us as part of this, and he's been doing this type of consumer protection education for well over 30 years. Jan, how has ElderWatch changed over the last 20 plus years?
So I think it's changed along with the times. It has changed as the mode and methodology of consumer fraud has changed. You know, I started in the office, in the Attorney General's Office in 1988. We didn't have computers, we didn't have cell phones. Fraud was via the mail, it was a knock on your door, it was a telephone call. And as we moved up into the late 90s and then the early 2000s, we started to see a real movement in the method of consumer fraud away from more in-person to, cell phone and internet and email and text messages today. So we haven't seen a dramatic change. We'll talk about that today in the kinds of scam, but what we've seen is a dramatic change in how those scams are accomplished.
Yeah, most definitely. I'll say that some of the scams kind of transcend time, but like for instance, like a sweepstakes scam kind of transcend time, but the way that people are being contacted is so different. It's not the letters and everything; it's phone calls and text messages, just like you're saying. So we'll talk about some of those details today. Up on the screen right now, most of the time when we do this type of presentation, we're talking about the most common scams that are reported to the ElderWatch line, and so mostly coming from older Coloradans. But today, again, we're going to be going through the complaints to the Colorado Attorney General's office, which would again include complaints or reports from people of all ages. And so I just wanted to show you, kind of in comparison to what we're going to be talking about today, the reports that we're hearing about on the ElderWatch helpline that are coming from Coloradans. Number one, imposter business. A lot of those are Amazon scams. Number two, identity theft. A lot of the scams we hear about on our helpline have to do with some type of identity theft, whether it be financial or personal information that's been shared. Computer tech support scams, very common still. Imposter government scams. When I started doing this work, those were the most common types of scams that we were getting reports on, IRS imposter scams, as well as Social Security imposter scams as well. Home repair and improvement, those show up on this list, and we will talk more about those today. Online dating and romance scams have been very prolific, especially as a result of the pandemic. Fraudulent sales, different types of issues with purchasing, sweepstakes prize and lottery scams, phishing scams, and then non-stranger exploitation, which is typically a situation where a loved one or caregiver is financially exploiting a loved one. And so those are the reports that we hear from ElderWatch. But today, again, we're going to be focusing really on what the Colorado Attorney General's office was hearing from I believe it was about 18,000 reports. Is that correct, Jan?
Yeah, our largest number ever.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing. And so up on the screen right now are the top 10 scams that were reported to the Colorado Attorney General's office in 2022. Jan, is there anything about this list that kind of surprised you when you saw it originally?
So one of the things that surprised me a little bit was how far down the list debt collection has fallen. Debt collection year after year after year used to be our number one or number two. So it's interesting to see that has fallen. Retail sales, for the listeners, for us, this is kind of an aggregation of several other categories we used to report on separately, and we decided to bundle them together. So that includes any in-person or online shopping experience. It includes things like subscription sales, people who buy something online and they get it every month or get charged every month and they can't get themselves out of it. It's a really broad catch-all category. And I think the other thing that surprised me this year was how high up home repair contractor fraud is. This is, I think, the highest that home repair fraud, it's always been in our top 10, but this year that it was nearly 1,000 of those complaints involved home repair and construction. And we can talk a little bit about why that may be later on in the program.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'll say that that surprised me too, especially with the contractors. That usually, when we see it, usually shows up somewhere in our top 5, but not that far to the top. And so I think that's interesting. I think it's also interesting that we're not seeing as many of the kind of complaints about scam phone calls. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that people are getting smarter about the calls that come into their phones, and I know that I use just a cell phone, and my cell phone provider has a service where they identify calls that come into my phone as either telemarketing or spam or unverified. So I get a variety of messages on my phone that tells me, do not answer this call. This is likely to be a scam. And I think a lot of people are starting to see that in their mobile technology, especially. So I think partly it's the phone companies are starting to roll out technologies to help us manage these. There's some new federal legislation that will eventually go fully into effect, which will, I think, further dampen some of the robocall type scam calls that we're getting. So I think that we're starting maybe to see the first indications that some of these technologies are helping us manage these fraudulent calls.
Oh, definitely. And I think, people are still frustrated, obviously, by scam calls, but, with new tools available, it is nicer that you can at least be warned that it might be a scam, just like what you're talking about. I'll tell you, my phone provider too, I'm having a lot of luck with them catching a lot of the spam texts that are coming through. And so I know that's becoming increasingly a problem. And some services are better than others in terms of getting rid of those, but scammers are really trying to get a hold of people via text message right now. So what we're going to do, though, is go through each one of these and talk a little bit more about them. Again, if you do have questions, I encourage you to put it in to the chat box so we can answer them as time goes on, and we'll kind of try to do it on the fly as we're talking about these. I'm going to kind of walk through the scam, and then Jan's going to provide the color commentary as we're thinking about all of the sports that are going on right now, hopefully a little bit similar to that. So again, retail sales was very much at the top of the list, as you recall. By far the most types of scams reported to the Colorado Attorney General's office. And again, as Jan said, it was a very broad category that kind of encompassed all of the different types of consumer purchasing that's going on, whether it be online with delivery problems, free trial offers, fraudulent retail sites, that type of a thing. Jan, when you hear about these types of scams, are there the ones that kind of stick out to you as ones that you think you hear a lot about, or that are particularly bad for consumers at the moment?
I think that I think the pandemic and of all of us working from home or not wandering much out of our house to go shopping, I think we're moving ever more quickly into a digital world where we're shopping online. And I think that what people get really frustrated about is products that are never delivered, products that are misdelivered. You get the wrong thing in the mail and you can't figure out how to return it, or nobody will give you information about returning it. People are complaining about refunds or their inability to get a refund. If they're unsuccessful in doing a chargeback on their credit card. So those tend to be the kind of things that we hear about the most. And that's been true for a number of years, but I think that's picking up as people are doing more and more online shopping. And everybody knows that in the online environment, it's a little bit harder to be able to tell real from false, right? It's not that difficult to create a website that looks like the store you want to shop at or the product that you want to buy. And so people get trapped into dummied up or lookalike, fake websites as well. So we need to refocus our energies a little bit on doing a little bit of verification on a site before we go shopping, look at their terms and conditions and look for things like their refund policies and how refunds will be processed and how refund credits or checks will be issued. So, take a little bit of time when you're online shopping to go into the details. Usually it's in a link at the bottom of most websites. We will talk about terms of use or terms and conditions, but familiarize yourself with that a little bit before you shop, especially with a retailer where you haven't been on their website before.
Jan, when you're doing online shopping, are there any tricks that you use in particular, aside from reading the terms and conditions, are there any other tricks that you use to kind of verify the legitimacy of a retailer?
So you can still go to the Better Business Bureau. They have a pretty aggressive program, and they do capture online retailers and complaints against online retailers. You can also do simple things like if you're shopping at Mark's store, you can go into the Google and you can put in Mark's store complaints or Mark's store reviews, and people are not shy about complaining about Mark whenever they get the opportunity to do it. So you can literally do that kind of a self-sleuthing and see whether or not a particular website has a good or bad reputation. You also want to look to make sure that websites that are going to be collecting your payment information are secured websites. So there's a couple of different things, and I know Mark can tell you about these, but whether it's a golden padlock or it's a an extra S at the end of a URL, so that tells you it's a secure website. That means that when you putting in personal information, name, address, phone number, credit card numbers, that is all encrypted by that website, and it's, in theory anyway, not available should they get a data breach.
Great points. Yeah, and I myself use that Google trick all the time. Putting the name of the company, especially if you've never shopped there before, with the word scam, complaint, fraud, whatever it might be. And again, like Jan said, people are not shy about complaining about an issue that they had. Also checking the reviews of the different sites as well, and the reviews of the stores you're purchasing from. I'll say myself, I had an experience where I was purchasing something on Amazon, and I purchase, things on Amazon from time to time. And I was looking at the reviews that people had put in of a product that I was looking for. And the reviews were really great for the product. And so I was excited about the prospect of getting it. But I'll tell you, I did not look at the reviews for the store that was selling it and on Amazon. And so I actually ended up never receiving the product, because the store, if I would have read the reviews from the store said that it was, that people had not received their products from that store. And so I was surprised Amazon hadn't taken it down, because they'd received so many bad reviews. But at the same time, if I would have taken an extra minute and read the reviews of the product and then of the store that I was actually purchasing it from, I would have known that I shouldn't have tried to do business with them. And so I wouldn't have had to do that back and forth. So just a little tidbit there, especially when you're thinking about marketplace sites, buying things too on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist too. It's understand kind of how the process works before going into that. Jen, do you have any suggestions for folks as they're dealing with marketplace sites, in particular like Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist?
I think that you've got to be wary of the legitimacy of the actual posting of products on some of these sites. If you have the opportunity to go directly to the source, even though you may end up paying a little bit more than what shows up on Craigslist, at least you know that it's a real brick and mortar store somewhere or a warehouse somewhere. We've seen way too many scams on both Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, eBay, where people either hijack somebody else's posting in order to get your information or your money, or the person selling it is just trying to see if they can get a lot of people to buy their product and ship none of it. So be cautious that when you go on to these, they're really just classified advertisement websites, right? They're not technically a store. This is an individual selling a product. So I think you have to be careful about that. You have to be careful about not accepting a check from them that you have to deposit and then return some amount of money to them, that they want to pay you in a cashier's check for delivery of a product, only to turn around and then have you refund some of that money. And usually those checks turn out to be complete counterfeits, and you've now overdrawn your bank account. So just walk in with eyes wide open on some of these self-created marketplace websites.
And the old adage, if something seems too good to be true, it inevitably is. So it also so important to know, the market value of what you're purchasing. And so if it's much better deal than what you should expect, it's probably, again, too good to be true and time to move on, right? Let's go to the next one here. And both Jan and I were talking about this before we got on the program today. But we were surprised that contractors were up so high on the list. And again, it usually shows up in the top 5 types of scams reported to ElderWatch. But Jen, any thoughts about why this issue with contractors and home repairs might show up so high on the list?
I have a theory based on the neighborhood where I live, and that is, starting in the pandemic, when people were at home, I think there was a lot of desire to finally get around to those home repair projects that maybe their work life had not allowed them to pursue. And I just look up and down my street and see the haul away dumpsters out in front of houses, more than you would ever think would be in any one block in any one neighborhood. So I think people have used this opportunity, a little bit of the downtime, to take on some home repair projects. I also think one of the things that's causing a lot more complaints is that even legitimate contractors are having a very hard time getting supply of materials, whether it's roofing or siding or labor. There's great shortages in all of these areas. And so people get frustrated that they sign a contract to add a back deck or to refurnish part of a basement or add a story. And the contractor seems like they are taking forever. And it's excuse after excuse after excuse. And some of that's legitimate. I think that we're in a period where materials are in short supply and labor is in short supply. So I think those two things working together have really frustrated a lot of consumers. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be on guard for the scammers, right? Make sure you get multiple bids from contractors if it's a major project, anything over $500 or $1,000. Make sure you get a contract in writing that specifies specific dates for completion and your payment obligations. You shouldn't be paying for any kind of a major home repair or home improvement all up front. You should be paying it based on their achieving certain benchmarks. Supplies have been ordered and delivered, framing has been done, drywall's been done, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure that your contractor is holding your monies in an escrow account to pay for its material suppliers and its employees. We see this all the time. We have a statute in Colorado that requires roofing contractors to do this because we had so many contractors that were taking your insurance money and they were actually using it to put a roof on some guy's house down the street because they were way behind on that job too. And then when they finally get round to your house, they don't have any money left in their accounts to buy shingles or other roofing materials. So protect yourself with really good contracts and use a private lawyer if it gets to be too complex or if the project is pretty significant.
Great advice. Jen, are most of the complaints that are coming into the Colorado Attorney General's office kind of about an existing relationship with a contractor? Are they more about kind of like the fly-by-night operations that we hear about? Sometimes and examples that I've heard of is someone says, oh, I'm, paving your neighbor's driveway, or I'm, putting a new roof on your neighbor's house. I've got extra materials. I just need, $1,000 and I can do your house too to get more materials, and they never show up. I mean, are most of the complaints you all are hearing about kind of about these existing agreements or kind of about these fly-by-night operations?
It's a good question, and it's about both. We tend to see we used to call them travelers, just itinerant, come into your neighborhoods. We used to see them primarily in the spring or after a major hailstorm, a major snowstorm, a major wind event, a fire event like we saw up in Boulder County with Marshall Fire a year ago. And we started to see contractors from literally all over the country show up in neighborhoods representing that they were insurance adjusters and they wanted to be up on your roof and they wanted to be inside your house. And they were trying to pressure you to sign a contract for them right now while they're in your neighborhood. So we definitely get those complaints. They tend to be more seasonal and they tend to follow a large scale weather event where there's a lot of property damages. So that's when you have to be doubly on top of your game and contact your own insurance company and have your insurance company send out their adjusters to look at your property. And just, you shouldn't ever go by somebody who knocks out of your door out of the blue with a great deal or offering to work in or on your house.
I appreciate that you mentioned hail, as we haven't had any major hail kind of storms recently, knock on wood, as spring is coming up. So I don't miss that hail.
Right.
And I'm sure some of these scammers do miss it, honestly, but that's fine. We can put them out of business, right?
Right. Yep.
The third one on the Attorney General's list was for professional services. And a lot of this has to do with warranties. Jen, can you talk a little bit more about the types of kind of problems people have with warranties that they receive?
So it's a couple of different things. If anybody's bought probably almost any electronic at almost any store, any local store, and you'll be asked at checkout whether you want to add a warranty on the whatever it is you bought, whatever electronics, and it's big in the electronics industry. And you have to make a decision whether adding 10% onto the purchase price of that is worthwhile. People need to understand that a warranty is not insurance. So it's not regulated by the State Division of Insurance. It's not regulated by anybody in the state. And there's no way for you to know whether or not the warranty company has enough assets to pay the claims, whether or not half of what you would complain about is excluded. And you may have to leave the store and log onto a website and register your product to even know what the terms and conditions of the warranty that you just bought. So that's one thing. And those are usually pretty legitimate products, although people do complain about them, that, I put in a complaint and they keep telling me why it's not covered or why it's excluded, or, all those other things. But this also includes one of the still most prevalent ongoing telephone scams deals with extended automobile warranties. And people get these calls and they answer them and they're told that the warranty on their car is expired and they can get for a really cheap price an extended warranty on their vehicle. And these are products that either do not exist at all or are backed by a really suspect company where if you try to do any kind of a major claim on these telemarketed warranties, you're in for nothing but headaches. So do not respond to pop-up ads, emails, text messages, and especially phone calls trying to sell you extended car warranties. Now, we haven't seen telephone used to sell appliance warranties, or we do see some home warranty protections, but the big one here is automobile warranties, and we still get these every day.
Jen, I've, times when I've registered a vehicle, I've noticed that I start receiving those type of inquiries about car warranties in the mail. Do these folks, companies, scammers, whatever we want to classify them as, do these folks use public records to generate their lists?
Yes. So automobile sales, property sales are usually available for purchase by anybody that wants to find out who's buying cars, who's registering a car, who's getting a new license plate on a car. And same thing with real estate.
So if you wonder why you're receiving these things, again, a quick Google search of your information, and also understanding what is available out there in public records is a very good way of someone generating those lists and then in fact sending those to your mailbox, unfortunately. Still talking about cars, but not necessarily related to warranties. On the ElderWatch helpline, we definitely get folks who are having a hard time with a dealer or a hard time with maybe a repair shop that they think they're getting a raw deal. Jen, it sounds like your office is getting a lot of these same types of complaints. What should folks watch out for when dealing with, whether it be an auto dealer or a repair shop?
So with any of them, you want to make sure you get an opportunity on the premises to review a contract or an invoice that it's going to cost you X amount of work to repair your car. This is what we're going to do. Here's the sales contract on your car. You want an opportunity to look at it. You want an opportunity, if possible, to take it home with you and have somebody else look at it. But you've got to be looking out for things like hidden fees and charges, right? Dealer handling and prep. What we call gap insurance, right? This is a dealer trying to sell you what is basically a product that if your car is totaled while you still owe money on the car, this is a product that will pay the difference between the damage value of your car and the amount that you owe on and we do a lot of cases with gap insurance, inadequate disclosures, improper interest rates. They include that in your loan, but it pushes your finance charge over legal limits, things like that. but it's still about, you know, a car contract can be the most amazingly complex document, and trying to sort through in that contract how much they're actually giving you for a trade-in, for example, how much credit you're getting, whether or not you're qualified for some advertised dealer special, you know, can be very time consuming. And, you know, you sit down and they talk at you so fast sometimes. You know, you first you meet with the floor salesman, then you go back and meet with the finance guy, and then, you know, you're bouncing around, and pretty soon you've been there for 3 hours and you're exhausted, you know. So a good tip is always to bring somebody along with you, right, who can keep your blood pressure down and be a second set of eyes. But yeah, we get complaints about car dealerships all the time.
Yeah, it's a daunting process because we don't, you know, typically buy new cars that often. And so when you have to do it, I know a lot of people kind of avoid it because they just don't want to deal with the hassle and that waiting that you're talking about. So that's a really good point and a really good tip to bring someone with you. And also, you know, I think a lot of the times people feel at a disadvantage when they're in a situation where they are you know, going to repair shop. I mean, they're going to repair shop because they need assistance with something, and they don't know necessarily how to fix what's going on. And so that person could be, you know, I've definitely had calls to the ElderWatch line with folks who are being taken advantage of. So I think, you know, again, getting other opinions from friends and other repair shops is a good way to go about that. But know that if you've had this type of issue before, you're not the only one. And great tips from Jan there. Next one on the list for the Attorney General's office was government agency issues, potentially frustrations dealing with state or local government entities. And again, I've heard these types of complaints on the ElderWatch line. Jan, what types of government agency complaints are you all hearing?
Well, so from the legitimate, you know, from actual government services, usually it is, we get complaints about everything from how people are treated when they're at the DMV or when they're at, you know, any other government agency, lack of response time, inability to get through to anybody who's actually live and in person. And you know, just like everybody else, you know, the government is having a hard time keeping itself fully staffed. The people are just not returning back to the workforce. You know, with those kinds of frustrations, people just need to take a deep breath and understand that that maybe there just are staffing shortages. More problematic are the continued government imposter scams, whether it's IRS or Social Security, or big ones right now are Medicare, right? So we just finished open enrollment period and people will be getting their IDs, and we see so many different things come out of the woodworks this time of year with regard to Medicare. You know, you shouldn't buy any kind of a back brace or neck brace or knee brace or other equipment from somebody calling you on the phone. You shouldn't respond to anybody who's telling you that there's a problem with your Medicaid or Medicare account, because that's always a scam to try to rip you off. So, you know, that's the kind of thing we're seeing here.
And I'll tell you, we've just recently had a slew of reports come in terms of Medicare imposter scam and that type of Medicare fraud. And so it's just really important, again, if you're a Medicare beneficiary, to remember that you shouldn't be giving that number out to anyone who's just calling you unsolicited. It's only for you know, your known doctors and healthcare providers, because that's a, you know, even though it's not your Social Security number anymore, it's still a very valuable number. And there's scammers out there who are trying to charge Medicare for different types of products and services. And just like Jan was saying, the back braces, the neck braces, DNA tests, all those types of things, things to be watching out for. So thanks for that. Again, if you do have a question about anything we're talking about today, please enter it into the chat box. I know some people have joined as we've been going, but again, if you have a question as we're talking today, please do enter it in the chat box. We're happy to answer any of the questions that are reasonable out there for us. Next one that's on our list, and again, this is one that we've been really seeing trend recently too, in terms of the calls that we've been getting, but are complaints about lending companies, people who are looking for loans, maybe going out on the internet and looking for loans. And just because they're short of funds and need a little bit of extra help. Jen, what types of complaints are you hearing with regard to lending companies, and what should people be looking out for when they are looking for a legitimate type of loan?
So a lot of times this is both unlicensed lenders. This could be loan brokers. So it's illegal in Colorado for a lender to charge an upfront fee in order for them to make a loan. I mean, they can charge you a nominal fee to pull a credit report, for example. And there's some legislation that we're watching this year in the State General Assembly that would allow, in certain instances, for for those kind of fees, those hidden fees, to be capped or prohibited. But it's also, another big one here is student loans that fit into this. And people on this call may be surprised that we're talking about student loans, but the number of older Coloradans who are either still trying to pay off their student loans or who have co-signed or guaranteed a grandson or granddaughter's loan, a student loan, and are getting hit up now for repayment on those loans. So we get complaints from virtually all age groups about having very difficult times working with the student loan servicer on a repayment plan, on an income-based repayment plan. Attorney General Weiser has added a student loan ombuds person to his office, and she works on these kinds of complaints on a daily basis, trying to help people navigate what can be a very complex situation. So it's all of the above, right? It's mortgage loans that seem way too high. It's threats on foreclosure when people are not in default. We see all kinds of things around this space.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing up that interesting tidbit about student loans as well, because there are so many people out there who are helping kids and grandkids, as well as people who are still paying off their debt.
Right.
And so we do hear those on the ElderWatch line as well. It's not just about young people who are dealing with student loans. So that's such a good point, and great work that the AG's office is doing on making sure that they have people there to help out in terms of the student loans and educate folks about the student loan situation. Another category that shows up on the AG's list is with regard to real estate sales and services. Jan, what are you hearing with regards to the different complaints around real estate transactions?
So one of the things that we started to see last year, and I think is reflected in somewhat in these numbers, is companies, realtors, real estate brokers that are essentially paying homeowners a very small amount of money, $800 to $1,000, that they claim are not loans, that they never have to be repaid. But the consumer is told that they have to sign an agreement that essentially says that if any time in the next 40 years, in one example, you want to sell your house, you have to use us as your listing broker. And these are being filed as liens against people's property. They don't understand the contract, and they hire a broker to sell their house, and this company jumps out of the woodworks and files a lawsuit saying you're in breach of our contract and you owe us a commission as if we were your listing broker, 3% of the value of your home. So, those are ones that we're actively working on, actively investigating today. But it's anywhere. This ties a little bit into the lending complaints, because there are so many people involved in a real estate transaction, from both the listing and a buyer broker to a settlement company who's handling your closing and title insurance and all these other things. So we get complaints all the time about, I just was trying to buy this house and nobody told me that there were problems with the soil. Nobody told me that there'd been these major repairs done because the floor shifted in the house because of expansive soils, or flooding was a problem. So we get all kinds of complaints about, that there are defects in a house that have not been reported.
Great point. And when we're thinking about this, we're talking about cars, we're talking about houses, we're talking about major appliances, that type of thing. I mean, it's no surprise to me when you sit back and think about it, that when something goes wrong with the transaction that involves a lot of money, obviously, that they're reaching out to your office to letting the office know about it. When you get a complaint like this, Jan, is the Attorney General's office able to, help with individual issues, or what are they focusing on most?
It's a great question. So we don't have the staff to investigate every complaint that comes in, right? Mark mentioned that it's roughly 18,000 last year. So we look for general patterns. We look for companies that seem to be constantly getting consumer complaints, and we realize that they just may have problems and they'll get an investigation. This last year, the Attorney General rolled out a mediation program where consumer complaints will be, under the Attorney General's letterhead, will be forwarded to a business and asked for a response to the consumer complaint. Now, it's informal. It doesn't look like you sit down in the room and you fight it out until you get an agreement. But it's been pretty successful so far, and we're trying to get that staffed up to be able to mediate even more complaints. And so this is an area where if there's a legitimate dispute over a disclosure or non-disclosure, or over some aspect of a real estate sale, that we can hopefully help mediate a resolution to that complaint.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the prospect of that mediation program blowing up a little bit in terms of that work. And I was excited to hear that the Attorney General last week just announced that you all are trying to expand that. And so that's very exciting. And I think just knowing that you have the Attorney General's office in your corner in certain situations where you feel like you're being treated unfairly is going to be a really important thing for consumers in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at the next one on the list, I'll say that it actually is the one that appears at the very top of ElderWatch's list of the most common types of complaints that we hear about from folks who are reporting different types of frauds and scams. And I'll say that generally speaking, we probably get more reports of kind of the straight up scams where people are, again, posing as someone else than the business complaints that we've been talking largely about on this call. And so, in terms of the business imposter scams that we hear about, so many of them have been with people reporting to be scammers reporting to be workers at Amazon or other large companies like banks or Netflix, or again shipping companies, that type of a thing. Are you hearing the same types of thing, Jan? What other types of entities might people be posing as in hopes of getting someone's money?
So all of those things, anybody that that has customer accounts where you have a subscription, whether it's Apple TV or Netflix or Paramount or Amazon Prime, all of those are subject to this kind of a scam. And what we've seen in the last year, and myself personally have seen in the last year, is a real movement of these scams away from email, what we call phishing scams, where you get an email saying, we've got a problem with your bank account, we got a problem with your Amazon account, we got a problem with your Netflix account. And we're starting to see that move to text messaging. And I myself probably get one a week, a text message from a shipping company claiming that there's a problem with the delivery and click on a link, or I get one from Netflix that there's a problem with my account, click on a link. And these, I couldn't tell you when these first started to show up, but I think it's been within the last year or two that I'm getting these crazy text messages that where the link is indecipherable. You'd think the link would be blah, blah, blah at netflix.com, but it's a series of numbers and letters .xps or something. And so they're just nonsensical, but it's amazing how many people fall for this and think, well, there's a package that needs to get delivered, or there's a problem with the package I'm sending. I better click on this link because the text says it's US Postal or it's FedEx or it's UPS. And it's all of it's non-legitimate, all of it's illegitimate, right? And if you get these things and you have a Netflix account or you have a bank account, or you are in fact shipping or expecting delivery of a package, don't respond to an unsolicited text message or email, right? Call up the company. And if you're shipping a product, you have a shipping label, the tracking number, you can have them figure out whether this is legitimate or not. But I have to tell you folks that these messages that come seemingly out of nowhere, text messages now especially, are always bogus. Right? There's not many things in life where you can put an always on, but this is one I feel pretty comfortable saying. Always fraudulent.
Well, Jan, first of all, I'm really jealous that you're only getting one a week, because I get 2 or 3 a day. And I'll tell you what, my Amazon account keeps getting suspended for whatever reason. And in reality, that I go and sign into my Amazon account and nothing is going on.
Right.
And so I think it's again, really, really frustrating to deal with these types of text messages. And again, there are some different services out there now that are starting to weed through some of them as well. And so I'd say investigating some of those text messages is really important, and taking the advice of Jan and not clicking on those links, especially the ones that are gobbledygook, I think is a really important thing to remember. And it's again, understanding the communication methods that these different entities use with you. And so if you've never received a text from Amazon before, and if you've never received a text from UPS, even if you are expecting a package, there's no reason to believe they'd text you today. And so it's, again, very important to remember those types of things, and the types of communication methods you should be expecting from these different entities. Debt collection, and we kind of talked about debt collection at the top of the hour, where Jen, a long time ago, when debt collection used to show up at the top of these lists regularly. Why do you think debt collection has gone down to the bottom of the list, though at the same time it's still showing up in the top 10? And what should people be looking out for with regards to different types of debt collection?
Yeah, I think something that the listeners may not know is that the Attorney General's office actually licenses debt collectors in Colorado, whether they're located here or located nationally. If they're collecting debt in Colorado, they have to be licensed by my office. And I think that in the last 3 or 4 years, as we've staffed up the group that does this licensing and enforcement, I think we've started to see some real impacts on the number of complaints that we've taken on. These complaints tend to be either very aggressive and harassing debt collection practices. So the law limits the hours a day that they can visit you or call you on the phone or contact you about a debt. The law limits who they can contact to try to collect a debt from you. They can't contact your employer. They can't contact your neighbor. All of these things they're prohibited from doing. But usually these have to do with debts that are not owed, more than bad debt collection practices, right? I get this call. This guy says, I have this loan that's outstanding. I've never taken this loan out. It's why we always tell people to get their credit report at least every year and make sure somebody hasn't taken out a loan in your name. But that's the predominant kind of complaint that it's either harassing or it's a debt that I don't owe. And there is a specific complaint form that you can fill out that goes to our debt collection licensing team. And they have a group of investigators that take a look at these.
Wonderful. Well, I learned something today, because I didn't realize you had a debt collection licensing team in your office. So now I know that, and I think it's a great consumer protection feature of your office too, because people get so sick of these situations and the harassment that they deal with. And so again, I really appreciate the work you're doing around debt collection and making sure that people are not being harassed. And so again, happily, this category is not at the top of the list, though it's still very frustrating for a lot of people. I believe the last one on our list, number 10, has to do with health and medical services. When you receive complaints about healthcare providers, billing practices, doctors' practices, different types of things like that, what does your office do?
So again, if we get a healthcare provider from a hospital to a doctor that's engaged in really suspicious conduct, we do an investigation. We have in our office a Medicaid False Claims Act unit. So doctors that are falsely billing Medicaid for services not provided or in excess of services actually provided, they can actually commit a crime and sometimes a felony in the state of Colorado. So some of those that involve Medicaid get elevated to a different part of our office for investigation and potential prosecution. I have a prediction that this is going to be an issue that 10 years ago was not in our top 10, but we're going to start seeing it more consistently. Healthcare costs have gotten so out of control. Insurance costs have gotten so expensive. More and more people are buying insurance products that have very high deductibles or co-insurance requirements, which means that suddenly they're on the hook and they're not hoping just that their insurance company pays all of this. So people are getting bills that are shocking. I don't know any other way to say it. They're just shocking how expensive it can be. You know, we looked at a complaint in our office about 6 or 8 months ago where somebody went into a standalone emergency room and got 5 stitches and were charged $1,800 to get 5 stitches, but it was an emergency room. There's a bill in the legislature this year to greatly restrict hospital facility fees. So it'd be limited to the hospital and any of its on-campus sites, but you know, their clinic 5 miles away or telemedicine or other procedures, they won't be allowed to charge a hospital facility fee anymore. So this is just an area where people don't understand how expensive healthcare has become, especially in an emergency room and in a hospital. And the best advice that people can get is to ask a lot of questions, right? Don't rely on going to the hospital's website and looking at their list of charges because they're indecipherable. They're, you know, a million lines of different procedure codes. You have to try to go in and figure out what it's going to cost you. If you're not in an emergency situation, have a conversation with your doctor, and at admission, have a conversation with, what is this going to cost me? What exactly is going to happen? What exactly are the procedures that are going to be performed? And what are those procedures going to cost me? Now, we've been battling, not just our office, but advocates have been battling for better transparency around healthcare costs. We've been unsuccessful in getting really quality bills into the legislature. It's you can imagine the healthcare industry lobbies heavily against too much transparency. U.S. Congress and U.S. Medicaid, Medicare have made some advancements in requiring hospitals to put up negotiated charges, not just what they're going to bill you, but it's so complex, and you should just make sure that you advocate for yourself as they're asking you to sign an informed consent form at admission, that you ask them for some representation of what this is going to cost me.
Great advice. And I've even noticed recently that you might even hear doctors reference the fact that, oh, this type of treatment might be a little bit less expensive than that type of treatment, that type of a thing, especially when there are options and it might be not an emergency situation. So right. I think that's interesting too. And I think they're acknowledging the fact, again, like what Jan's saying, that healthcare costs have gotten very expensive, and people might be looking for options in terms of solving some type of health issue. So I appreciate you talking about that, Jan.
Yeah, and let me just make one more point. People are constantly tripped up on not understanding the difference between a standalone emergency department and an urgent care facility. If you go to a standalone emergency department that says Hospital X emergency, you need to understand that you're going to be charged a lot more for those services than if you go get your services at urgent care. Urgent care, you know, they have their own issues, but they are way less expensive. And so we have people who think they're going to urgent care that actually walk into a standalone emergency department. And
great advice.
They get charged an arm and a leg.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be looking out in all places, because they're looking for money in all the places. And I think I appreciate that advice. And, you know, Jan, you just mentioned, you know, that trend in terms of healthcare costs that you're saying is going to be growing. I wanted to put up a couple other trends that people should be watching out for in 2023 as well. We're hearing lots, and the Federal Trade Commission as well, when they're talking about payment that scammers are looking for. They're often looking for cryptocurrency. They also might be offering opportunities to invest in cryptocurrency. This is a scam that is really ballooning right now. Lots of scams, again, involving the investment or the payment in cryptocurrency, so which is often a red flag of a scam. You know, we talked a little bit earlier about text messages and how so many of the communication methods that scammers are transitioning to is coming as text messages, and we expect that to happen more. Again, and as we saw in today's list, online retail scams were kind of number one, and so there's lots of opportunity for bad actors and scammers to be engaging in sales online. Jen, do you have anything else to say about these trends, or anything else you want to add to trends that you're hearing about or seeing at your office?
So the first one, payment with cryptocurrency. You know, I am fortunate enough to not be smart enough to understand what the hell cryptocurrency is, pardon my language. So I don't do anything in cryptocurrency because I can't figure it out. What we're starting to see when Mark talks about a trend here in payment, you know, for a long time, it was send a money order. It was wire funds in payment of some scam product or service. Then it became prepaid gift cards, prepaid debit cards. And now we're actually having online or in-person over the phone scammers who want you to go down to, there actually are crypto ATMs out there where you can put in cash and get tokens representing Bitcoins. And that's how they want you to pay to claim a sweepstakes or to claim a product, good, or service that doesn't exist, that's fraudulent. So just like we've talked to you for years about, you know, be very suspicious of any kind of crazy payment methodology. If somebody's asking you to pay in crypto or pay in gift cards, that should be a huge red flag for you going forward.
Great point, and I just don't think it's going away, unfortunately, especially with the accessibility and availability of those ATMs that we see at grocery stores and gas stations, just like what Jan's talking about. So definitely, again, consider that a red flag, just like what Jan said. If anyone's asking you to pay in cryptocurrency, I think it's really interesting. I was just thinking about it. I haven't had anyone tell me in the last, I don't know, 6 months that they paid for a scam via wire transfer service like a Western Union or MoneyGram. And so that, you know, is something that has really changed drastically, you know, since I started doing this work over 7 years ago. So I think that's a really interesting detail too. And I know that's something that's trending with the Attorney General's office as well. Jen, there's a quick question here. How can you tell the difference between an urgent care and a standalone emergency room?
It's a great question. So Colorado passed a law, I think it was 2 years ago, it might be 3 years ago, that requires a specific signage, both on the outside of an emergency room and inside where you're checking in to seek services, that you are in an emergency room of this hospital, even though the hospital may be 10 miles away. So it's law requires signage to identify, to let you know that you're now in an emergency room. You just have to be careful and make sure you're paying attention to that sign.
Well, that's great. I learned something else today. I didn't realize there was a difference. So I really appreciate you asking that question, Christy. Just again, before we wrap up, Jen, I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about a couple of things that are happening at the Attorney General's office. I know we talked a little bit earlier about the mediation service that's forthcoming from the Attorney General's office. Did you want to add anything about the Privacy Act information that's going on, or other, you know, pending investigations that might really impact consumers out there?
Yeah, so I will tell you that Colorado has now become, I think, one of the leading states in the country in providing protections for consumers' private data, private information, whether it's personal or financial. We pushed hard on a privacy bill that was passed last year in the legislature, and the Attorney General has a whole team that has been spending the last 12 months putting teeth to that statute by adopting comprehensive rules that will govern how companies collect and how companies use your data. We went through extensive rulemaking. We had a rulemaking hearing about 3 weeks ago that took all of 2 days practically to get through all of the testimony. And those rules are expected to become effective July 1. And so there'll be a lot more information coming out of my office about what you can expect in terms of your new protections in Colorado over your personal and private data that are being collected by companies that you do business with.
Thanks for bringing that up. I think it's going to be a game changer for lots of people ask about why are we not doing the same things as California, but I think it's going to be a game changer. And again, in terms of keeping your personal information to where you want it to, and I appreciate you detailing that. And I look forward to getting more about this as it rolls out for sure.
Yes.
Just in conclusion, I want to just run through some really quick kind of my laundry list of ways to avoid scams. We've talked about a lot of these kind of throughout the conversation today. But again, I always say if you follow this list, it's at the end of every one of my presentations, you have a really good opportunity of not being involved in any type of a scam. Protecting your personal and financial information, managing your phone calls, not talking to people who you shouldn't be talking to, or responding to text messages you shouldn't be responding to from people who you don't know. Doing your research, as we talked about, when you're making a retail purchase, avoiding contact with unknown entities. Again, I know there's lots of nice people on today's call. It's okay to be skeptical and it's okay to be rude. If that person on the other end of the line or on the other end of the internet or wherever it might be is trying to get your money or personal information, scammers don't want you to rush to, or scammers want you to not think about what you're doing and rush, and they don't want you to usually verify what you're doing with anyone else. And so again, don't rush and talk to others. Consider unusual payment methods a red flag, like we're talking about today. Bitcoin, definitely a red flag. But it sounds too good to be true. We talked about this today too. It is actively seeking information like you're doing today. Again, share your story. It might save someone else, and report again. So we can do presentations like this about what the most common things people are reporting. And again, just a few resources we talked about today as well. Stop Fraud Colorado is the Attorney General's consumer protection website that has lots of great information about avoiding frauds and scams. The ElderWatch helpline, again, will get you in touch with the ElderWatch or the Attorney General's office if you call that 800 number at the top of your screen. Jan, I want to thank you so much for being here today and being our guest and letting us, giving us some insight about some of the most common complaints. Do you have any parting words or advice for the folks who have joined us today?
No, I think just be careful out there, be smart out there, share information that you've learned about some of these frauds and scams with people close to you so that you become an advocate for their financial safety as well as your own. So I thank you all for participating. And let people know that this is going to be available for others to watch down the road.
Most definitely, yeah. The link will be sent out to you, and information about how to view it on YouTube will be there too. I hope everyone has a great Thursday, and look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Bye, everyone.